Welcome to Dialogue Dynamics, where we help you simplify your relational communication. Today, I'm going to be talking with you about a visit I took to the Listening Café, where every conversation matters. I'll share the lessons I learned about active listening and the difference between hearing and listening, including the 4 key ways a listener can demonstrate that they're actually listening. If any of this sounds like something that will be beneficial to you, then we'll get started in a moment. If it doesn't quite sound like your thing, just listen to the first story, and then we'll see you back next week. So now it's time to help you simplify your relational communication. Let's get started. Summer was coming to an end, and the sign over the cafe door was weather-worn and really hard to read. When I stepped inside, I saw a guitar player off to the side with the tip jar. There were a couple bucks in it and a little change, but it wasn't a very successful night for that person. Now, along the other side of the cafe, there was, I'd call, a smattering of eclectic tables. But here's the amazing thing. While it looked like a rundown coffee house, the kind of thing that I visited back in my university days, this meager pop-up shop had filled almost every single table, and they were consistent at doing it. So I took a seat, one of the few left that were open, and I waited for my friend. A waitress greeted me with a big mug and a big pot of coffee. Now, I'm not a coffee drinker, so I asked her for tea and suggested she leave the mug and coffee for my friend. But as I was thinking, I was getting a little too curious. I decided to ask about the place and how long they had been in business. The waitress told me about the owner. Her name was Sarah, who was a former corporate executive. She wanted to open a peaceful place for people to escape. Okay, I'm not talking about room escapes now here, but a place where people could unwind and let go, whether it be employees or managers, whatever it might be, some place where people could get away from the negative impact of society, somewhere where they could just relax and have a conversation. So the pop-up store became known for not only their aromatic coffee and their cozy ambiance, but the unique culture of active listening, all of which Sarah, the owner, took great care to foster. At the time, I really had no clue if I was in the right place. I followed my friend's instructions. I was a little uneasy until I noticed the small menu that confirmed the name was the Listening Café. There wasn't much else as far as promotions or anything else. I mean, this was a kind of a dive, except for incredibly popular. When the place first off opened, it was opened under a different name. But after a few weeks, as I understand it, Sarah started to notice her customers seemed disconnected to each other or preoccupied. Some, instead of talking, were playing on their cell phones. And here's the funny thing that Sarah really heeded and tried to change. She realized that even when a person was sitting across from someone incredibly interesting, their conversation was still limited. Basically, most conversations that actually occurred seemed superficial to her, if not a distraction from whatever was going on their phone. Sarah realized that the digital world had made meaningful conversation a rarity. So she set out to counter those negative effects, and she trained her staff in the key components of active listening. They learned how to pay full attention to the person speaking, and they were encouraged to show understanding through nonverbal cues, as well as provide reflective feedback. Now here's the kicker. To further improve the situation, Sarah divided the space into 2 zones. She had a quiet zone, no cell phones allowed, And a communication zone. Most people kept the cell phones away because they understood the concept of the place. But in either way, the quiet zone was truly quiet. Voices only, nothing else. And all of these were just to facilitate their customers having a genuine connection with each other. Along those lines of the genuine connection, Sarah even hosted a weekly listening session. That's right, it was weekly. One person would basically share their heartfelt story or some of the challenges they were going through, and others would practice their active listening skills. These sessions were absolutely unique. I never heard of any other coffee house at all having that. But the key to them was that they were guided by a path of empathy. There was no judgment, and there was lots of respect to go around. In fact, some people shared their joys, others their sorrows, dreams, even fears were shared. Can you imagine a supportive environment in a cafe where you are safe to share things you often keep secret? It was an amazing place. Absolutely amazing. Active listening is not merely hearing words, but actually comprehending all nonverbal communication as well. So this active listening is really a comprehensive process that involves the listener's attention, their interpretation of what they're hearing, and their response. So attention, interpretation, and response. In other words, the listener must hear, understand, and value the shared message. I think I should probably repeat that. The listener must hear, understand, and value the message shared with them. The power of active listening is its ability to build trust, foster empathy, and create a deeper sense of connection. When done well, active listening enhances the quality of interactions and certainly understanding. In personal relationships, professional environments, and even in casual encounters, this is a true fact that just keeps on working. It's kind of like gravity, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I guess that's the good way of saying it. It's kind of like gravity. It happens as long as you take those steps. Okay, well, maybe it's not quite so straightforward. But if you know the difference between hearing and listening, it's much easier to get involved and be a part of that. So active listening is distinctively different from what I'll call passive hearing. The main distinction is the hearing is a physiological process that is always available to us as long as we have ears. And listening, active listening, is a conscious choice that takes advantage of the hearing. Okay, I got to explain this a little bit differently because I'm not an expert in this area. Hearing's about the sound waves entering our eardrum. Listening, on the other hand, well, 20% of listening is still hearing based on the sound waves. But it's also far more than that. It's also the nonverbal communication, and listening to the visual communication, and listening to the emotional and the spiritual communication. You see where I'm going with this? Listening takes focus and effort. Now, the active listener demonstrates about 4 different natural ways that they're actually listening and responding. We can use those natural responses to test ourselves to see if we're engaged in the conversation or not. I'll go over those 4 things here. So the first one is that the person is focusing on the speaker, the person who's talking. They're avoiding distractions and they're really engaging in the content of the message. The second one is giving nonverbal cues like the head nod or maintaining eye contact, or even sometimes mirroring the speaker's emotions and demonstrating engagement by reflecting on your understanding. Which brings me to the next one. And that's providing reflective responses, either by paraphrasing or summarizing the message. Sometimes I like to ask clarifying questions, and responding in a thoughtful manner also works. Sharing empathy with the speaker is the fourth one. That's done by connecting with their emotions and basically just showing them that you care. Showing that concern based on their story that they're sharing. Okay, while these things are ultimately natural to some extent, most of us were taught in prior relationships to avoid this type of engagement to protect ourselves from the pain. Because sometimes pain is there, especially when there's miscommunication. But that cultural training, it made us susceptible to a lot of what I'll call barriers that some of us face when it comes to communication. Those things that hold us back or cause us to hesitate. Barriers tend to block active listening. In fact, one of the biggest barriers that we face is personal bias. Yeah, ouch, right? The list goes on. The ones that we don't like to admit to, the ones that include having preconceived notions or a knee-jerk emotional reaction, or sometimes even just the environment or the cultural distractions that occur. The only way to control these in-the-moment responses, or this visceral response, is sometimes to think through in advance what might possibly happen. In other words, using mindfulness to engage and to be ready in the conversation to listen well. This requires self-awareness on our part and the willingness to engage with the person that we're actually listening to, and engaging to the point where we're listening fully to what they have to say. I gotta be honest, there's some people I just don't want to hear everything they want to say. But to be engaged, that's a sacrifice I have to make. Now, when I say fully, let me clarify right away that willpower is not enough in some cases to overcome that visceral reaction that we have, or that taught cultural reaction that we have. You see, this whole thing is really about a chemical response in our neurotransmitters that drive this type of response. Okay, I'm not really smart enough to talk about neurotransmitters and if I'm even pronouncing them correctly. But let me just say that, simply put, a lot of this is physiological. It's a response to whatever instinctual action that we're going to come up with. Quick little story. When I was a little kid, I noticed that when people hit their thumb with the hammer, they would swear. Well, I didn't want to swear growing up, so I practiced saying Jiminy Cricket. Not that I hit my thumb with the hammer often, but I would put my thumb on a piece of wood and I would just slightly tap it, and then I'd say Jiminy Cricket. And I'd do it again, Jiminy Cricket. Well, I decided Jiminy Cricket was not the right answer, so I decided to call it Jiminy Christmas. I know, strange guy, right? But I did that a few times, and lo and behold, a couple of years later, something happened where something smashed my fingers. They actually got caught in the door when the door got slammed. And I went, Jiminy Christmas! Because I had actually trained myself by thinking in advance on how to prepare for that. So I didn't swear that day. I instead made everyone laugh because they were like, what? Okay, but enough about me. The bottom line is, it might take time for you to figure out why you react in the moment to some kind of a knee-jerk reaction or something that's shocking or whatever. But if we take time to really think it through, we have the opportunity where we can work on it personally and bring the kind of response into our life that we want to have. Now, some of us, of course, need to learn this process to just understand why we behave in certain ways at any given situation. And I know a lot of you right now are saying, wow, this is all about active listening. Yes, it is. But listen, once you figure out what causes you to react in the way you do, you can take control of it. After all, we're adults. So once you figure it out, we are then responsible for upgrading our behavior and listening skills too. Now, if you really want to talk to a clinical psychologist about this, I recommend Dr. Henry Cloud. I had a chance to meet him once years ago. I can tell you he knows his stuff. But from a layman's standpoint, let me just shift over and talk about the benefits of active listening, something that I can speak to based on my experience. So the benefits, the first benefit I noticed was that active listening made me more empathetic in my relationships. It almost came natural, and for me that was a shock back then. Today most people think, oh, you're really an empathetic person. Well, back then I wasn't. So I had to actually learn those things. The key here is that I could tell that when a person shared their story, I could actually see it. I could actually understand from their perspective what they were saying. And I could feel it. And I felt for their circumstance. And that's how I started to be able to show empathy. The residual benefit was the process developed my character and earned me trust. And I would say it also developed mutual respect between me and the person that was sharing. Life-changing experience for my life. These skills lead to better collaborations as well, increased productivity, and an inclusive space for everyone that touches our products or projects. Okay, so you get it. Active listening is a really good thing. So how about some tips worth practicing? Are you ready? Number 1, I'm going to give you 5 of them. Build a conducive environment to minimize distractions and practice focusing on the person, not the clock, not your mobile device, and not what you'll say next. That's the tough one. Not what you'll say next. You want to create an environment that forces you to focus on the person. Back when I was married, I was kind of embarrassed because sometimes I couldn't tell when my wife wanted me to fix her problems or just listen to them. I couldn't find any signals that I could pick up on. So we decided that whenever she needed to talk through an issue without my sharing a solution, we'd have a sit on the front porch swing. Simple, right? But because of the visual cues, I was immediately able to respond, and I knew that I was to listen and reflect on what she said without adding in any suggestions. It made for a great positive impact in our relationship. Okay, the second one. We want to be free to kind of loosen up, move around, use our body language in affirming the person that's speaking to us. A lot of types of demonstrations won't feel natural, especially if you're trying to nod on cue. In fact, sometimes it can look ridiculous if a person is forcing themselves to nod instead of just naturally nodding. But here's the thing. When you practice engaging and you practice demonstrating that you understand them, it turns to natural later, and then it doesn't look anywhere near as bizarre as someone that's actually practicing it. So you have to lose a couple conversations for the sake of gaining your future with anybody else. So number 3, avoid interrupting the person who is sharing. Okay. Sometimes I get so excited about the conversation I'm having with someone, I keep on wanting to jump in instead of hearing what they're saying. You know, when there's that synergy between two people and you just want to add to it because it's just a glorious moment? Those are hard. That takes a lot of maturity to step back and say, okay. But there's another kind of person that steps on other people's voices. Not the one that's excited about the collaboration. It's the one that thinks their words are more important than the other person's. That's got to be thrown out. You know, I do get so excited when I'm relating to the person that I tend to interrupt just a little bit. But I am paying attention to it so I can back off of it. I don't want them to get the wrong idea. I don't want them to think, boy, he's not connecting. Especially when I am connecting and I'm just too emotional about the connection. The key is to make sure you do not come across as that person who's trying to control the conversation, who's trying to hear themselves speak because they love hearing themselves speak. You get the idea, right? Make sure you really listen to the treasure that the person is wanting to share. Okay, number 4. We need to reflect on and paraphrase what they've shared with us. This is going to demonstrate not only our understanding of their feelings and their facts, but it's going to really show us being engaged in what they have to say. It's going to show that we care. It's also going to lead to number 5, us showing empathy regardless of our view on the topic. Okay, this is one of the best ways to demonstrate that you understand their point. It takes a lot of maturity to hold the line until you are sure that you know you understand what they're saying. Now, what I'm saying here is that even if you're opposed to what they're saying, your goal is to make sure they understand that you understand their point. Make sure it's fully understood and you know that they know that you understand them before you ever mention an opposing view. During one of the listening sessions at the Listening Café, John and Emily, who were pretty much on the brink of separation when they first showed up, later on they shared how attending a listening session was their last resort. They reflected back on their first night when they followed the directions and worked really hard to listen to each other. The first attempt allowed them to slowly and carefully express themselves, and being open-minded, it kind of paved the way for their relational healing and their future reconnection. The last time I had a word with Sarah, she told me that the couple had started a coaching business to help couples better communicate with each other because they went through it and it worked. Isn't it amazing what a little pop-up shop can do? The impact of the Listening Café rippled beyond its walls. Customers often reported back on how listening improved their marriages, developed new professional collaborations, and, well, the stories went on and on. But most importantly, they all built a deeper sense of family and often community as they listened to other people that came into their lives. I kind of miss those days of that little cafe. You see, the pop-up cafe wasn't designed for longevity, so it closed once a store took over the space with a long-term lease. But I got to benefit from it, and now you've benefited too. I hope you remember the story of the Listening Café just as a hint to create space for listening and being listened to. Active listening is really a beacon of empathy and understanding. I'd even say it helps you forge deeper and more meaningful connections. Maybe it's time you make your breakfast nook into a listening cafe. I don't have a breakfast nook. Anyway, you got the idea. All right, well, that's all I have for today. Check out some of my other videos, subscribe, and please like this video and spread the word if you think this show is beneficial for you and your friends. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next episode.